Hello everyone, and welcome to our video on importing and exporting data in Excel. So the first step of this is understanding what data importing is and why we use it and why we need to do it. So when we're working with Excel, we've discussed formulas and all the tips and tricks of Excel to date. What we haven't discussed is where do we get the original data that we're using for all these calculations from? Well, most people just use they've either copied and pasted data from another workbook, so it's hard-coded like this, or they're linking into another workbook, which I've said before I do not recommend, or they've got an export of data from one of their systems which happens to export into Excel. For example, they may have payroll data from their payroll system and download it into an Excel file and then put it into their Excel workbook. Now they've got this data tab and they've, as I've recommended, they've done the best approach, which is to have a divided tab called source and then put all your tabs over here, which are data. So anyone opening your file knows that this is what you're working off and you don't touch or change anything in here so that someone can come in later and compare the data you're using as your source. So that's one option. That's the best way to do it. And if that's how you're doing it, perfect. However, there are some instances where we need to take a different approach. Now, one example is you're pulling data from a database. So, for example, you may have something like a system at your workplace, for example, an SQL server, or it might be Oracle, whatever systems you're using. Sometimes you can pull data directly using an SQL query. And that means you never need to update your data. You're never going to make a mistake by copying and pasting something wrong or wrong formats of text. And there's a lot of pros for actually doing a direct query with a system. So you can pull it from a database like this, or you can pull it from any Microsoft system like Azure, or from SharePoint or Salesforce, or from other sources as well. So some of the most common ones are just put there as shortcuts by Excel. So the two key ones are text/CSV, and number two is web. So text and CSV is a type of file, and sometimes the system that you're using may not have an Excel output, which is unfortunate. So we've got to use this text CSV import. You can also import from an Excel file as well, although generally we just copy and paste the output and reference what workbook we're using, so we generally don't use that option. And then the final one is from the web. So if you've got a particular web page that is live, for example, I've pulled up one here that I want to pull from, which is the gold price. So let's say you've invested in gold and you want to track how it's trading, plus historical data, and we want to make sure that it updates regularly without having to copy and paste the data every single time. So this is a really good example of why we might use the query function from online data. So the first step is to go to the data tab in your workbook, and then we're going to select import data, get and transform data from the web. So we're going to click that one there. It's then going to populate a field which asks us from a web address of the page we want to use. So in this instance, I've already pre-found this page. Now, a few things to note is it doesn't work with every website, and it works better with some websites than others. I've chosen Yahoo Finance because it does work better than other websites, and the data is set out nicely in tables and gives me everything in the format that I want. So just be very selective of what you can and can't use. Yahoo Finance is a good starting point. So I'm going to select this web page here, and then I'm going to copy and paste that into the window and just wait for it to load. So what it's doing now in the background is it's reaching out to the website and seeing what it actually has and whether we have the rights to access it and so forth. So if your website doesn't work, then this section isn't going to work either. Okay, so what we have here is we have the website that we've linked it to, and then Excel said, okay, we've found 4 different tables based on the back end of that website. So you can then select on each of the tables and see if it's the data that you wanted. If not, then maybe you need to try a different website. So I don't want this table. This is just some HTML backend stuff for the website. I don't want this table. So this is, at least we're getting some data, but it's not the data that I wanted. Table 1, okay, so this isn't the table that I wanted either. And then table 2. Okay, so this is what I do want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to press load, So we can also go load to and specify a certain place in the document where we want it to go. Just as at one point, it is a little bit slower than how I would normally like to work with data, but there are some benefits is that it is actually live and you can refresh it every now and then. So you can import it into a new worksheet like so, which means it's going to create a new worksheet, or you can do an existing worksheet and select which cell you want it to go into, or you can even just create a pivot table report. So we can try both methods. So let's just try table first of all. So we're going to see all of our data over here. And then maybe we can just do it as a pivot chart. So it's just, you don't even need a table. It's just a chart that loads straight from the website. But let's do a table first. Sorry, put the wrong thing in there. So I'm going to select that cell there, and it's going to import all the data across here according to how many rows and columns is in. So you'll note that right now it's saying external data getting data, which means it's basically running the query right now with the website. Okay, so as you can see, now it's imported the data from the website. So this isn't hard-coded. It's actually a table connection. And we can see we've got every date over here. Now the benefit from doing this over just copying and pasting the data here is tomorrow, if I open up this report, what I can do is actually go refresh all, press that button, and the whole table is going to refresh. Now there's nothing to refresh right now because obviously it's still today's date, nothing's changed. But every day that I do this, I won't have to re-import it again. So all the data is going to be there for me. So you can do this for share prices, you can do this for weather, for time, all kinds of things. And now we can do our own charts and select our dates over here. We can do our close price over here. And we can do a chart like that. And now every time we click refresh, our chart's going to update as well. So we might need to clean up the data a little bit. But yeah, just a good example of working with data from a website. So that's our first option. Our second option is actually working from a text/CSV file. So what we're going to need is some sample data to work with. I've sourced some data in a CSV format already. If you don't have one of those, well then you don't even need the function at all, and you can just watch along. But it's more in case, it depends on your situation with what software and what outputs it generates. These days most things come into Excel anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. But let's go through it anyway. Let's click on that, and we're going to go sample data here. And just in the same way, Excel's now trying to reach a connection with that file wherever it's saved, whether it's on your server or your desktop. If it's on your desktop, it's probably going to import it a lot faster. Okay, so the next thing it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, so what's the origin of it? We don't really need to touch that. What's the delimiter? So this means it's basically a way of if it's a text file and everything's in a text format, you might have something which divides a column. For example, it might be a comma, might be a colon, or it might already be separated by a tab. It just depends on what the file format looks like. As long as this looks nice and clean in the table, you should be good to go. In some instances, it looks like it's going to be all separated into a single row. Then you may need to change the delimiter to match see how it's going to look like something like this. And you just might need to play around with what's the correct delimiter in your file format to actually split it out into different columns. This is effectively working in the same way as the text to columns function, which is over here where my mouse currently is. So I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. So let's just import that in now so we can see what that looks like. And again, it's running that query and pulling that data out. And here's our table here with all of our credit card transactions. This is all fake data, don't worry. And then we can play around with it and do whatever we want. And again, as soon as we update that file, let's say we export it again from our system tomorrow, we can just go refresh, and Excel's going to refresh the connection. And if there's new dates and new data in there, it'll just update it. You don't have to copy and paste over the top of it. So the next thing I want to show you is if we actually want to remove our connection. So in the data tab, you can see this tab over here. If we unclick it, it'll show you all of our live connections and queries that we have currently, and you can individually refresh them here as well. And if you hover over, it'll give you a preview of what the data looks like, the types of columns, the last refresh date, and the data sources, and so forth. So you can actually delete some of these as well. If you no longer need this, then you can delete the connection altogether. Alternatively, what you can do is you can unlink it. And what it means is the data will effectively be hard-coded after this point, and it will no longer refresh. So if we try and do that and press unlink, so it says warning, this will permanently remove the query definition. So the data is not going to go away like you would if you deleted it, but it just means it's no longer going to refresh. And you'll notice that the refresh button is now grayed out. We can't do anything with this anymore. The thing I want to show you is this new feature in Excel as well, which is very similar to these online queries, except it's a built-in function into Excel, and it's a lot easier to use. So currently there's only two features at the moment. It's stocks and geography, but I believe over time Microsoft Excel is going to add in additional categories of data that you can pull in. So let's have a look. Here is a blank workbook over here. And I want to type a few key companies. So I'm going to type Google, Apple, and Disney as well. Okay, so then I'm going to select these data over here, and then I'm going to go over here to the data types and press stocks. Now straight away, Excel is smart enough to figure out which companies they actually relate to on the stock exchange. You'll notice that because it's got this little symbol here which represent a little company, I suppose. So if I click left click here, and it'll show you the company that it relates to and some data and where it's pulling from and so forth. Now, what I want you to do now is to click on this little insert data box, which hovers, which pops up if you click on one of the individual ones. So here you can actually start inserting some of the data. For example, maybe when we want to put in the closing price, so we're going to put in the 52-week high. So there's our 52-week high, so we can put in our header however we want up here, 52-week high. And see how the formula is now E6.52-week high? We can drag that down and it operates in a formula in the same way, so we could lock a column and so forth. So we can continue to add in different types of data, so we can add in 52-week low, so there's 1,000. We can do, what else can we do? We can do the price earnings over here. We can do the previous close. We can do the price. There's a price. And, whoops, sorry. What else can we do? So all kinds of cool data over here. We can do shares outstanding, volume average, and so forth. So there's lots of different information that we can put in here. There's market cap. So just put your respective header at the top. You can drag this down. And there we have it, live data. So every day that you open the file, you can click refresh like that. And the data is going to update so it's current. And you can do the same for geography. So you could do like countries over here. You know, we could do Australia, you know, New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong. Okay, so let's see what happens if we put geography over here. Okay, so it's recognized all of those because it's put that little map symbol next to it. So if we put data over here, we've got things like birth rate, we've got CPI, we've got GDP. Okay, so let's see who's got the biggest GDP. So I guess Australia's got the biggest GDP. It's got bigger GDP than all of them combined, actually. There's all kinds of data in here. I guess the key thing is you can use it however you want. The key takeaway is that it's dynamic and it's live, and it's using a connection, and that's how it works. The thing that I want to show you is, I mentioned it before earlier, is when you're working with a CSV file or something like that, you're not necessarily going to get the data all nicely divided by columns. You might get it combined like this, so it's separated by a single delimiter. Separate it out. We have to figure out, first of all, what's the delimiter. In this case, there's a semicolon. So you can see the semicolon there, and there, which is separating the different columns of data. So we've got our customer number, date, and value over here. So how we're going to separate this out is using the text to columns function. So this is just another workaround. You can do it with formulas as well, but this is just a little bit easier. So what we do is we select the data first of all, then we press text to columns, and then we've got different options. We've got fixed width or delimited. So fixed width is basically you put a divider in every 4 characters or something like that. But if you've got a character number which is 8 letters and then a date which is 6 and then a value which is 5 or 6 or 7, it depends, then you need to use this, which is delimited, which means you can split up characters based on certain characters. Sorry, you can split up columns based on certain characters. For example, every semicolon or every comma or so forth. So in this case, what we want to separate it by is the semicolon, and you can see in the preview it's already working down the bottom. It knows where to put the line. So what it's going to do is it's going to delete out the semicolon and replace it with a paragraph. Okay, so what we're going to do is go next, and then how do we want to format the data? I just want to format it as general, and then the destination is where you want the text to go. So I'm going to put it right there, and I'm going to press finish, and all of a sudden our data is split out as we need it. So that's another way of working with that data, but it's all hard-coded. There's no connection or link or anything like that. Okay, cool. So that's everything that I want to talk about in the importing and exporting of data.